uh, or I'm about to drop. I am Rob in Maine. But please chime in with where you're calling from and if you're running for office, what office you're running for. And we're going to talk all about getting out the vote tonight. So this is Get Out the Vote. We're going to talk about tactics to win, all the things that you need to do to be able to deliver in this last month of the campaign for most people. I think 70% of the candidates who are running with goodparty.org's tools this year have elections on November 4th. So it's a really exciting time in October. To me, is the most like essential part of the campaign season on any campaigns. We're going to really dig into how you can finish strong on these campaigns. So good to see callers from Texas. We got folks from New Jersey, folks from Ohio, Florida. Awesome. And I know that there are a bunch of people who are watching over on Circle. So hello to our Circle people. We're going to be having comments that are made and questions that are asked in Circle fed over to the call as well. And when it comes to questions, guys, you can ask questions at any time throughout this, and I will do my best to weave them into the presentation throughout the call. There's a Q&A button that you can press at the base of Zoom, and it'll actually create a running list of questions for us. Or you can ask questions in the chat if you want to. And those of you on Circle ask questions, and those will get fed to us as well. So the more interactive these calls are, the more fun they are for Derek and I think the more that we get out of them. So without further ado, I'm going to let Derek introduce himself. Derek, you're going to be our expert for the evening on all things Get Out the Vote. You and I have worked a bunch of Get Out the Vote efforts together. But please tell us about who you are and share some of your bona fides when it comes to making sure that people finish and win on their elections.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Hi, everybody. I'm Derek Lane. I am the Senior Campaign Success Manager over here at goodparty.org. I have been running GOTV operations since 2012, which is 13 years now, which is crazy to me. Everything from like really small town ballot fights to mayors, state reps, state senators, congressional campaigns, governors, presidential campaigns at the state level. I've been inside of those boiler rooms, those war rooms for GOTV. I've seen what works. I've seen what fails. And I can tell you this, when it comes down to winning or losing, it is almost always turnout that makes the difference. And my role here at Good Party is to help take those lessons and help independent and third-party candidates like you guys build a really disciplined GOTV operation that can compete with what we're seeing on the partisan operation. So excited to be here, excited to talk with you guys about GOTV.
Awesome. Well, folks, we're going to cover a lot of information on this call. We're going to talk about developing a really structured approach to executing a successful Get Out the Vote operation. We're going to make sure that folks walk away understanding how to implement some of these best practices and also how to put some of goodparty.org's tools into effect to both track and ultimately execute some of the things that we're suggesting here. So lots to get into. We're also going to have Patrick from our product team walk through a really quick demo of some of these tools in action. But why don't we start, just a lot of our candidates are running for office for the very first time, Derek. Can you explain what Get Out the Vote or GOTV really is all about?
Yeah, GOTV, you guys are going to hear me. I'm going to use almost exclusively that phrase throughout the rest of the conversation here. GOTV stands for Get Out the Vote, and it is campaign shorthand for basically everything that you do in that final stretch of the campaign to make sure that people who support you actually get out and go vote. So it's the final phase of the campaign where everything shifts over from, hey, can I have your vote? I'm the best candidate for this office, to, hey, you're supporting me. It's time to get out and go cast our ballot.
Yeah, well, thank you for clarifying that. Now, just to get into it, it's October 2nd. There are less than 5 weeks to go until the November election. Where should candidates be focusing their time and their energy as well as their resources at this phase of the campaign?
Yeah. So campaigns generally follow a sort of chronological sequential order for the messaging that they're putting out in front of voters. Many of the folks on this call, I bet you, even if you don't know sort of what those phases are called, I'm sure you've been carrying them out just on intuition. But at this point in the election, October 2nd, 32 days until election day, we should all be right about on the verge of completing our voter persuasion efforts and start building the operation we're going to need to essentially carry your campaign over the finish line on election day.
Excellent. And I know we're going to talk lots about this as we get into the details, but I do see a question from the chat here, and I want to lift that up. This comes from Mark, who says early voting is beginning already in Ohio. It starts next week on October 7th, and he knows that many people are voting prior to November. So this October period that you're talking about is a really key time. And he asked that question of, do I need to focus on GOTV now? And I think that's a really helpful grounding place to begin as we talk about this. We'll talk about how you can begin to target those pieces. But Derek, what's your answer to that? Do you wait till November for getting out the vote, or does it start now?
No, I mean, get out the vote. I'm going to say typically happens in two fairly distinct phases. You're going to have your election day GOTV. That's going to be your Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday of the election. But then you should have sort of a GOTV light program that happens, that kicks into place essentially the moment that somebody has access to a ballot, whether that's a vote by mail ballot, early in-person voting, whatever the form of early voting looks like. As soon as people can get ballots in their hand and you have information that they have requested a ballot, you want to talk to them. I mean, GOTV starts as soon as ballots are out. So if your ballots are out in October, you're probably kicking into GOTV a little bit earlier. I know nowadays, 2025, that a lot of jurisdictions, voting is going to be 75% of the way done by the time we hit election day. So that's a great question. You said that was from Mark. Mark, great question. Your GOTV should start as soon as ballots are ready, guys.
Yeah. And just piggybacking off of that, it seems like get out the vote is incredibly important, right? Can you just really drive home in terms of importance, how important, like how much impact can a strong get out the vote program have, especially to Mark's point, one that begins as early as possible?
Yeah, I'm gonna talk about the importance of GOTV in relation to something that happened to me on a campaign back in the early 2010s. I was working on a very small town ballot initiative. I was a moratorium to block like a local wind farm, not a presidential race, just sort of neighbors voting for the future of their community. And for the first 3 months of this effort, we built a very extensive supporter list. I mean, people who were registered, people who we knew were with us. And on election day, we had a volunteer who was stationed at the polls, and they were tracking turnout throughout the course of the day and reporting it back to campaign HQ. And at 7:15, about 45 minutes before the polls closed on election day, we knew from the people that came in and had submitted their ballot that it was more or less a toss up. It was about 50-50. So we polled our list of supporters. We saw a family of supporters who hadn't come in to vote yet. And so I picked up the phone and I gave them a call. And at 7:45, this family pulled up in a minivan. 5 folks came barreling out of this minivan 15 minutes before the polls closed. They walked in and cast their ballots. And when the results came in shortly after 8 o'clock, we won that election by 3 votes. Okay. So if we hadn't been organized, if we hadn't been able to recognize sort of where we were and the very close nature of the race in the moment, if we weren't able to be flexible and adaptable to the information that was coming in, we would have almost certainly lost. And what I want you guys to take away is that these types of organized, targeted GOTV can come down to literally one car ride full of people, one phone call, one family, can absolutely make or break the outcome of your election. And the smaller your community, the smaller your pool of voters to work with, the greater that impact is, the greater these GOTV programs will have on the outcome of the election. So I think at the end of the day, a well-organized GOTV can be the difference between coming really close to winning and being sworn into office in January.
I love it. And that's one of, I think, hundreds of stories that go like that. I grew up in a pretty small town and I've checked the voter rolls before and seen 12 to 13 as the overall vote turnout in that town. So these decisions, these votes, they can be incredibly close. And that is why when it comes to get out the vote, having a well-organized program and a program that leaves nothing in the tank to use some analogies here is so important. So I'd love to sort of drop into the chat here for the audience. How many of you are running in a race that's going to be decided by less than 100 votes? How many of you are in races where you think that the margins could be that close? So I'm going to go ahead and drop that question in the chat. I also I see a question in the chat from one of the attendees here who's asking, how do you text message? How do you use the text message tool for pro subscribers? We're going to do a demo of that on this call, so stay tuned for that. That's definitely going to be one of the things that we highlight towards the middle section of the call when Patrick comes on. And yeah, so we'd love to hear from anyone on the call here. And Derek, for you, yeah, I see Mark here is saying some of his elections have been decided by less than 10 votes. Virginia and Matt says here in Mass, in Quincy. Curtis Clay says his last one was 30 votes. What do you make of all this? Advice for those folks?
Yeah, I mean, here's the truth: is that most of you are in races that are in that zone, right? Most races are decided on the very margins of the election. Chances are your race is not going to be decided by thousands of votes. It is going to be decided by hundreds of votes, dozens of votes, maybe even just a handful of votes. And that's why this phase of the campaign, GOTV, is where campaigns, I mean, they either win or lose, right? You can run an absolutely perfect persuasion program. You can have the absolute best message in the world, but if your supporters don't actually show up at the polls, none of that matters. None of that matters if people don't actually come out and vote. So every campaign, like I said, goes through sort of a series of phases, whether you realize it or not. Whether you're deciding to run, I call that pre-launch. You make it to the ballot, that's your launch phase. You move into the awareness phase, which is like, hey, there's an election, guys, and I'm running, and here's why I'm running. The persuasion phase, which is what most of us are in right now, which is sort of messaging focused around why you're the best candidate for office and how you compare to your opponent. And then, like I said, there's this GOTV phase, which is this big final shift where everything narrows down from very big messaging to one very, very specific question, which are my supporters actually going to go cast a ballot? And this is the moment you guys should stop asking for support, start reaching out exclusively to your supporters during the GOTV phase and giving them the information that's essentially just instructions. Here's where you vote, here's when you vote, here's how you vote, right? And if you don't build the operation to deliver on that, your campaign really risks stalling out sort of just short of the finish line, which can be a big bummer. I've won a lot of elections. I've lost a few campaigns myself, and I promise it's a much funner night when you win. So.
Yeah. So shout out as well to Nat Crosby and Juan Garcia, some of the Circle candidates who are also in these really close races where the turnout is expected to be razor thin. This feels like a good time to just jump right into some of the core best practices of building a strong GOTV program. So, Derek, I know that you've got some rules that you like to follow when building a program. What do you think it really comes down to at its core?
Yeah, I think the four pillars of a strong GOTV program come down to know your universe. And I'm going to go through all these guys. I'm going to list it all out and then go through them. Knowing your universe, building your timeline, picking the right tools to reach out to your voters, and picking the right people for the roles that you need. And so knowing your universe, that's fairly straightforward. By the way, guys, I say universe. Some folks might call this an audience. Some people might call this a target. For me, a universe really is just like it's a static list of voters. In this case, our supporter universe is just anybody we've identified as being a supporter. But these are your priority, right? Your supporter universe. GOTV is not about chasing maybes, right? It's about locking in the people you already know are with you. Building your timeline, because GOTV isn't just election day. Okay, it starts with that early vote period, like Mark talked about, or absentee balloting, vote by mail. It builds into your weekend of action. It's going to ramp up during those last final days, and then ultimately peaks on election day itself. And across this GOTV phase and across your timeline, you're going to want to layer various forms of contact across this list of supporters. Picking the right tools, match your tactics to the moment, right? The personal high impact tools like door knocking, live phone calls, peer-to-peer text messages, any form of like two-way communication are going to be good for the sort of Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. And then sort of visibility tools like poll greeting and sign waving and GOTV parties. And then there's a set of scalable tools, your robocalls, your text message blasts, your social ads, your digital ads, things like that. And then picking the right people. And I think this is often an afterthought on GOTV campaigns that over the course of my career, I've certainly tried to elevate, but GOTV does not happen by accident, right? You need the right people in the right roles in order to pull this off and do it well. Somebody who coordinates volunteers, someone who's helping you track data. But ideally, you are matching volunteers to tasks that they can succeed at, right? So take your chatty extroverts and throw them out on doors. Take your detail-oriented folks, have them handling your lists or your data. Your leaders sort of managing volunteer operations. But a well-organized team is really the engine that makes GOTV possible.
Awesome. So let's talk about knowing your universe, right? I want you to kind of get into breaking down each of these four pillars. And knowing your universe feels like the most important to start with because it can drive which tools you pick, which people you pick, and it can really set the timeline for you as well. So please, Derek, talk a little bit more about what you mean by universe.
Yeah, like I said, and you're right, it does sort of underpin the entire foundation of what we're doing towards GOTV. If you guys have been on one of these trainings before, you probably heard me say that campaigns are data harvesting machines. That's what we're doing throughout the course of the campaign, is building this list of supporters that we're going to need for GOTV. And that list of supporters, that specific group of people that said, yes, they're going to be supporting your campaign, I'm going to refer to that as the universe. Like I said, some people call it audience, target. I like universe. It seems bigger, right? And the way I think about it is the first 4 out of 5 phases of the campaign are sort of the persuasion aspects of the campaign. They're about building your team, building that list of supporters, and GOTV is making sure that your team actually shows up to play. So if you're spending the last 4 days talking to undecideds, I promise, for the most part, you're going to be wasting very precious time that we have over those last 4 days of the campaign. The goal in GOTV is to mobilize that supporter universe. And your supporter universe is primarily made up, again, of folks who've explicitly said, yes, I'm going to support you. I'm definitely going to be voting. Every volunteer who's come through the campaign, every donor, every person who's requested a yard sign, and basically anyone who lives in a household where you have supporters, or anybody you've ID'd through your like doors, text messages, robocalls, personal connections. When should one shift from IDing supporters in going into GOTV? That's a very good question. I just see that pop up across my screen. We'll get into that a little bit. I'm going to say GOTV for me has historically been I'm going to say there's a sort of GOTV light that happens starting 10 days out from the election and then 4 days out from the election, meaning Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday is when you're going to shift into real hard, like push to the polls. Again, that timing might be a little bit different depending on when in-person early voting is available in your state or when vote by mail comes up. Um, but at
Yeah,
the end of the day,
I would
you're
say I would say generally the start of early voting is when you really need to shift into get out the vote mode. The moment that mail ballots drop and that early voting goes, ideally by then you've identified all of the supporters who you're going to be turning out. It's usually you're in a bit of trouble if you haven't, and you're playing catch up ball at that point. And that is usually where you see people talk about, okay, we have a major vote deficit that we need to close. And it sometimes, especially in smaller races, you can see some persuasion tactics get paired with get out the vote to a certain extent. But I would say certainly a good rule to follow is to try to have your IDs that you need to win totally buttoned down as alongside that deadline for early vote or vote by mail ballots going out.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely right. I think the moment people have ballots available, where I live, it's about 10 days before the election when early in-person voting starts. Again, if you are in a place where you're in Ohio, right, and your early voting starts almost an entire month in advance uh, of election day proper, then you might want to sort of shift your timeline and build your timeline a little bit differently than someone who lives in a jurisdiction where they don't have early voting outside of the weekend. So, but yeah, you want to build that list of supporters. That is the primary objective between now and whatever that date is that you switch your campaign over into GOTV.
Yeah, and I invite people to let's make this practical. Feel free to drop a yes or a no in the chat if you have a supporter list built already. And if yes, do you know roughly how many people are on it? And absolutely no judgment if your answer is not yet. That's exactly why we're talking about this. We want to surface this as a best practice for folks. We began talking a little bit about timeline there, Derek. When candidates have an idea of who's in their supporter universe, what happens next in that timeline?
Yeah. So the sort of next thing that happens in the timeline, uh, I'm going to say this. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I build these timelines out very specifically, working backwards from election day, going back to the start of GOTV. Um, because at the end of the day, you want to figure out, okay, if I know how many supporters are in my list, if I know how many doors are on this list, right? You're going to be able to do the what I call labor projection math, right? To figure out how many bodies am I going to need to go out? How many doors do these bodies need to knock on per shift to figure out, okay, well, I need to recruit 30 shifts over 4 days to knock this entire audience and potentially 60 shifts if I want to knock them all over again on election day, which is typically good practice. But I think when people hear GOTV, I think the folks' minds immediately go to election day and sort of just election day. What do I do as a candidate on election day itself? But like I said, for most of you, GOTV is going to be a specific window. How long that window really depends on sort of what the early voting regulations look like in your district. But for for this purposes, we're going to talk about GOTV weekend. That's Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, running up into election. That's really when your campaign should be firing on all cylinders, like 15 hours a day. I know that's hard for some of you guys, but GOTV hours are long. So, and I think sort of talking on what Rob said, just double tapping a little bit. I think for most of you, in a situation where you maybe don't have a full supporter list, that you can and should and likely will do persuasion right up until you hit that GOTV switch. Ideally, you can identify all of the supporters you need, plus a little bit more in case your turnout projections aren't 100% accurate. But where it gets interesting, like I said, is when you get these places with early voting or vote by mail. So I'd love to hear from the audience, just like how many of you guys have early vote programs where you live, or vote by mail programs, especially if they fall outside of that like 1 week from election window. How many folks have like really early voting?
Yeah, so how many of you have even had early voting that started? And Derek, this brings up a great question from one of our Circle community members. Kimberly, who is listening in from Oregon, says in Oregon, they have mail-in voting and ballots arrive at least 3 weeks ahead of the election. And the voter pamphlets arrive 2 weeks before that sort of explain what's going to be on the ballot. So the question there is there something that she can do specifically with texting to help firm up voters and move them to turn in their ballots? So, yeah, what would you do for in terms of advice for Kimberly in Oregon, who has about a 5 week, 3 to 5 week window when people are really keyed into thinking about who they're going to vote for?
Yeah, now I will say that the really cool thing about vote by mail ballots is in most states, in like 48 out of 50 states, it is publicly available information when somebody requests an absentee ballot. And so if you want to get really effective with your texts, you can send out a message to the list of folks who we know have requested a ballot and have a ballot in hand, to give them your pitch, to make sure they fill out their ballot, hopefully for you, and submit that ballot while they have it in their hand, while they have that pamphlet next to their ballot. But if you're doing this, we typically call this an absentee chase program. But basically, any person who has a ballot in hand, you should contact them. They should be at the top of your priority list for door knocking, for texting, for phone calls. But nobody who has a ballot in hand should get away, should get out of this election without hearing from you. That's my recommendation. I think texts is a very effective and cost efficient way to reach out to those folks. Second, maybe only to like a live dial, easiest way to reach those folks. But early voting is like a really huge opportunity to start these GOTV light programs. And I mean, the really cool thing about absentee ballots is that you can lock in votes before the election. And ideally, you are banking as many votes before people go in to vote on election day as you can. That sort of eliminates some of the need for a bigger lift on election day itself. And it gives you an opportunity when you find supporters, when absentee ballot and early voting is available, to just push them directly to the polls, encourage them to go vote today. I saw a question here in the chat sort of related to this. Is it possible to send a text message blast only to those who haven't voted yet? And the short answer is yes. I mean, if we have the information on who has requested a ballot and who has voted, we can also sort of turn that list on its head and hit the opposite side of the coin, and only talk to folks who haven't voted, which as you get closer to the election day itself, that's what you're going to want to do. Every time you see that someone has already voted, we're going to strike them off all of our contact lists. If they've submitted their ballot, they've done it. They've done their civic duty. There's no more persuasion. There's no more turnout. They have done 100% of the things they can do for this election, which is cast their ballot. And then you can spend your time focusing on folks who still need that additional touch, who still need that additional push towards the polls, and stay focused on them instead of bothering folks who have already done the thing. And I will say, my favorite pushback to anybody who's ever resisted my call to get them to vote early is letting them know that they get taken off of these political contact lists as soon as they vote. Every effective campaign, at least in America, I can't say the world, but here in America, the effective campaigns are removing those folks. They get taken off the contact list. They stop getting bothered. That is a huge benefit for folks like myself, as like a 35-year-old independent. Everybody wants my vote. I get tons of voter contact from every campaign you can think of. And when I vote early in just a few weeks here in the state of Maine, I will happily be taken off those lists. But yeah, early voting is exciting. And hopefully it will free up your volunteers to spend more time on election day helping out and not having to stand in line. So,
Yeah.
uh,
Um,
yeah.
when you're targeting these voters as well, some things to have in mind are that you can actually look, at least with the voter file that we provide through goodparty.org, at their likelihood to turn out. Like, are these consistent voters? Are these inconsistent voters? And if you're making really difficult decisions around budget, if you have a more limited budget, you'd probably want to target the voters who need an extra touch, right? To be able to get out and vote. If you have a voter who's never missed an election before, you probably don't need to have them in your get out the vote universe. And you can instead focus on the people who tend to be kind of spotty or inconsistent voters to remind them there's an important election, that there's a candidate that they should be excited about. And especially with these municipal elections, a lot of people forget that some of these smaller elections are happening. People tune into the bigger presidential or congressional races and forget about some of the really important local offices. And you need to remind those folks. So with that in mind, I want to talk about the tools and picking the right tools and right tactics. Texting, you mentioned, super helpful. But once candidates have mapped out their timeline and built a really good structure that includes their volunteers, the big question is how to reach people, whether it's text or mail or all the other ways that you can do it. What tools do you think that campaigns should be thinking about during especially the last 4 GOTV days?
Yeah, my short answer is you should use every tool you can get your hands on and have the budget for. GOTV is not the time to hold back. I promise you don't want to be sitting there with $10,000 in your bank account and 10,000 votes short. That doesn't feel good. So knocking doors, making calls, peer-to-peer text, digital ads, whether that's through like more traditional media channels like online newspapers or news sites, things like that, or through paid social advertisements, robocalls, poll greeters, sign waving, house parties. If you can do it, you should do it. And I like to think of this as throwing the spaghetti at the wall, right? Because at this stage, every single touch point has the chance to tip a voter into action, that action being going into vote. Some of these tools obviously are more personal and therefore more impactful. Doors and phone calls are going to be the most impactful way you can get folks to turn out to vote. Some are more scalable, right? Texts, ads, direct mail. But the goal isn't necessarily to pick and choose. The goal is to layer them so that a voter doesn't hear from you once, but they hear from you multiple times through multiple channels over those 4 days.
Excellent. So really great question from Michael in the chat here. He's interested in best practices to incorporate for contacting voters who help them get onto the ballot in the first place. So the voters who sign their petitions, and whether you can use that petition list, since you have all their contact information, as a lead list for Get Out the Vote. So Derek, what are your thoughts on sort of best practices around using that list?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anybody who has shown a level of support, and I would say in a lot of places, signing your ballot access petition, especially if it's you're in a jurisdiction where you're only allowed to sign one ballot access petition per seat, then absolutely you should. If you go to your goodparty.org account and you grab your voter file list, chances are we have some form of contact information, at the very least their address, so you can knock on their door. But those are going to be high priority supporters. I will say that a lot of folks who tend to sign ballot access petitions tend to be maybe on the more likely side to vote as it is. And so you definitely want to strike that balance between not talking to that person who's voted in 8 out of the last 8 elections, but also, sort of giving them a light touch if they're in that medium turnout range. But absolutely, that is very fertile ground to start finding for supporters. And one of the things you can do too with supporters you run into, and I've seen campaigns use this to great effect. But the hey, can you ask 3 friends to vote with you question is really good, especially if you're in very small, sort of maybe city council and under races where the voting population is a little bit less, that sort of what I would call relational organizing and that relational turnout push can be really helpful because there are chances are some of your supporters have contact information that we don't. They might know people who are not yet registered, who are eligible to register, who they might be able to carry out to vote that we didn't have any visibility on before they registered. But it's going to be fertile ground for finding supporters, Sheila.
Yeah, I also think that this is an opportunity to build in some personalization. I think that personalization is always helpful for get out the vote. So if you have the ability, and this is actually Sheila, Michael's wife, who asked the question that clarified in the chat. Sheila, if you have the ability to maybe even match the person who collected their signature with the message. Like if you send a text message to the everyone who that canvasser collected a signature from that says, hey, voter X, this is Rob. You might remember that I collected a signature from you to get Derek Lane on the ballot, and now's the time to actually vote for him. I wanted to thank you for being a part of this journey so far and remind you to go out and vote on November 4th. That will trigger the memory of actually, hopefully, a really positive interaction with you on the streets, and you can get the halo effect into action there. So that could be a helpful piece. And I think this in general is a good light touch for texting around each of the deadlines that come up with voting. So early voting, vote by mail, and then election day itself. So, yeah. So Derek, any other advice on how some of these tools fit into the timeline that you laid out earlier?
Yeah, that's a good question because obviously you're not using every tool the same way every single day. Saturday and Sunday, I like to see really. I love to see campaigns start strong with like those personal touches. So big canvas launches, sending your volunteers out to doors, big phone banks, and any way where you can get one-on-one candidate to voter communication. So that could be like a house party or something like that, an event. For Monday and Tuesday, I would consider these like flood the zone days. This is where I like to see the scalable tools really start firing. Text blast. If you are one of my candidates, and I saw Virginia kicking around in the chat, we're going to be messaging around the day before election day, letting everybody know. The robocalls are firing off the night before. The digital ads are humming Monday and Tuesday. And honestly, I love GOTV messaging. It's very simple. Tomorrow is the day. Here's when and where you go vote. And Tuesday itself is sort of it's a little bit different because typically the candidates are occupied doing other things. A lot of election day is volunteer managed because the candidate has other responsibilities. But everything's running at once, right? So in addition to the texts and the ads and the calls and the robocalls, you've got poll greeters, you've got folks out there waving their signs, any sort of last minute knocks. I see a lot of folks who have their direct mail hit on that Saturday, Monday, right before the election. And so, again, the best case scenario is that a voter hears from you or comes in contact with your campaign messaging, whether that's direct voter contact or more passive forms of contact, like your sign waving and your yard signs. But you want to make sure the voters are hearing from you in different channels throughout the day. And I'll tell you my favorite tactic, and this might be one that I first did on a campaign with you, Rob, when I was far younger and had far less gray hairs, but is like an early morning lit drop on election day morning. No knocking, just sort of like leaving literature at the doors. So when people step outside, they've got a reminder just right there in hand. And I've seen some campaigns do some really creative stuff with this door knock, especially if they're doing just supporters. But I got a candidate I worked with a few years ago who, if they had GOTV specific lit, and they put a QR code on it. And when someone voted or was planning to vote, they could scan this QR code and essentially, like on their own terms, check their name off our list. So we knew instantly that we didn't have to follow up. We knew that maybe they were in line, and it like created a like a frame for Facebook that was like a little "I voted" sticker that they could use on their profile picture to also show the support that we were seeing at the polls, like in the digital space. We were able to sort of create custom campaign specific stuff for that. And so it can be really powerful. You guys can get creative with it. But those types of things, those early morning lit drops, I mean, can really set the tone for the whole day, remind folks before they even go off to work. And I'd be interested just if anybody has any creative ideas as a perennial chronic field guy for campaigns. I would love to hear if anybody's got any creative ideas for their GOTV kicking around. But yeah, I'd love to hear your ideas, but I'll kick it back to you, Rob.
Yeah, I got another question from the Circle community, and such great questions around the board tonight. But this one says that their voter base has a very diverse set of languages to embrace in their county. And they ask about, are there any, number one, good language or texting messaging apps that can help you with translation and narrowing down languages? But also, I think there's a question here of how do you segment a list for those pieces? And I'll let Derek speak to the segmenting piece and using that and delivering the message to the right person. I would say that with any translation app that you use, always have a volunteer who speaks that language natively be able to look it over. There's nothing, this like can backfire as a tactic if you kind of have the Google Translate version of this versus the authentic, accurate piece. So accuracy is key if you're going to try to deliver in the sort of different languages to specific communities. And the only way to get that is to work with someone from that actual community. So, and this is a great reason to reach out. So authenticity is everything with this tactic. But Derek, advice for any tools that can help you to deliver these messages, whether by text or otherwise, and any advice for segmenting a list for this purpose.
Yeah, I will just double tap on the idea that you should have a native speaker read anything that is written in a language that you are not fluent in. Up here in Maine, where I live, there's a fairly large French-speaking community. And the last time I had to write a piece of French political statement, I literally went to the French professor at the University of Maine and had him do the translation for me. Tony, if you're watching this by some miracle, thanks to you, buddy. But in terms of audience segmentation, if you are working with a political associate who has access to some of the more advanced data management tools that we have on our side, we do have some information on voters on what their likely primary language is. And so, hold on now. It's got real dark over here. It's good party after dark. Here we go. I'll work on getting that light back in just a second, guys. But yeah, it's absolutely we can break that list up by likely primary language and get that over to you guys.
Excellent. Well, I think it's time to talk about picking the right people. That's the next piece of this. So, get out the vote is a moment to be relentless. We've talked about not leaving anything in the tank. You know, you don't want to hold back and you don't want to overthink what's possible. You really want to throw everything you have at the wall to see what sticks, because every single knock, call, text, or piece of literature can be the one that gets you that one or two votes that pushes you over the line. But of course, none of these tools work without having the right people behind them. So I want Derek to dive into that fourth pillar, talking about picking the right people. What do you mean by that, Derek?
Yeah, this is the piece again that I think too many campaigns sort of treat as a as an afterthought, and it is the difference between a plan that looks really good on paper and a plan that actually delivers you votes. But when I say pick the right people, I mean two very distinct things. One, you need to recruit enough volunteers to cover the shift it's going to take to get through your universe. I think that's fairly obvious. But second, and just as important, is you need to put the right people in the right roles. If your best extroverts are stuck behind a spreadsheet and your detail oriented folks are out knocking on doors, you're going to burn them out. You're going to burn them out fast. And GOTV is all about matching your volunteers to the jobs that they can succeed at. So you'll need your door knockers, your phone bankers, your texters, but you also need folks who can like coordinate. That is such a huge role. I think it's a seriously underestimated um, in value is like your air traffic controller, right? The person who can keep track of what's happening and make sure that nothing falling through the cracks. Ideally, this is not the candidate. I think a lot of candidates, especially if you've spent the whole campaign being your own campaign manager, try to pigeonhole themselves into being air traffic control. But I promise, if you are a candidate and you are doing what you're supposed to be doing on election day, which is standing at polls, shaking hands, kissing babies, doing the politician thing, then you're not going to have time to also manage a dozen volunteers and go out and knock on 400 doors. It's improbable, probably not impossible, but extremely improbable, and it's a good way to set yourself up for a very stressful day. But I think making sure again that you're putting chatty people on phones, on doors, doing your voter facing stuff, taking your leaders and planners and putting them in planning positions is important. You should let people play to their strengths.
Yeah. So this feels like a good time to sort of ask, who are these people on your campaign? Have you thought about these pieces yet? Folks who are watching along, do you know who your point person is going to be for election day? Who's going to be keeping the trains running on time? If you do, let's do a little gut check again. Check in with yes in the chat. And if you don't, your homework is coming for this piece. Derek, sort of final thoughts on picking the right people.
Yeah, one thing I want to touch on, and this just is, I think, just a good practice for volunteer recruitment in general, but very specific for GOTV and necessary, is that all of your asks to get people to come help the campaign should be very specific. Don't say like, "Hey, can you come help out on election day?" You will get a lot more yeses that way. I promise you that. If you just say, hey, can you come help on election day? You'll get a lot of people who say yes. But it's very vague. And what you're going to end up happening with a lot of people who just say yes is that they're not going to show up to their shift, or they're going to show up and be like, oh, I didn't know I was knocking doors. I'm not prepared for that. But you should say something like, hey, we need you at the polling place from 10 to 2 handing out literature. Can you commit to that? Right? It should be time bound. It should be specific. They should know exactly what they are prepared to do. And the more specific the ask is, the more likely you are to get a yes that turns into a completed shift. And when you start plotting people into real roles, whether that's door knocking or poll reading, phone banks, data tracking, whatever it is, that's when your GOTV plan sort of stops being a wish list and starts being an actual machine, an actual GOTV program.
Awesome. Well, I want us to be able to shift into talking a little bit about the product and the product demo that we have planned. I see a question here about how do you access a voter file or sort of ascertain your list. And we'll cover pieces of that in the product demo in just a minute. But before we throw to Patrick, Derek, can you just do a really quick recap because we've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah. Look, when you strip it all down, an effective GOTV program comes down to 4 pillars. Know your universe, build your timeline, which is like the early vote window plus the last 4 days, pick the right tools, and finally pick the right people, because none of that happens without volunteers in place. if you focus on those 4 pillars, you will put yourself in a better position to win and not just come really close. The story I told earlier about those 5 people showing up in a minivan, those 5 people showing up in the last 15 minutes made the difference for me between winning and losing. And that's the power of a campaign that treats GOTV as seriously as they treat the entirety of the rest of their campaign. So my challenge to everybody watching this is in the next 48 hours, I want you to all sit down with your team and answer a few very simple questions. Who are the people on our supporter list that we absolutely cannot afford to leave at home or have them not participate in the election? Once you know that, everything else, your timeline, your tools, how many volunteers you need, all of that will fall into place, and you can start building towards getting those exact folks to the polls, which is what you want.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that, Derek. I'm going to let you take a little break from talking. We have a big set of questions to get into, audience questions that have built up, some that were submitted ahead of time. I also want to ask people, go ahead, this is a good round. We're going to come back and do 10, 15 minutes of open Q&A to close the call after this demo. But Patrick, we're going to go ahead and have you take over, and Patrick's going to do a screen share. And now that we've talked about universe, timeline, tools, and people, he's going to show you what some of this can look like in practice using some of the free tools and some of the pro tools that we have at goodparty.org. So Patrick, without further ado, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you so much, Rob. And thank you, Derek. I'm going to go ahead and, oh, sharing is not turned on for me. Rob, are you able to help me get screen sharing?
Just one moment, and our producer will get that for you.
All right. Should be good now. Thank you so much for that. Sorry about that, y'all. But yeah, thank y'all so much, Derek. Thank y'all, Rob. So what we're going to talk about right now in the product is a couple things. Pulling voter data. We're going to go over some core tools that you can use for scheduling campaigns, for text campaigns and robocalls. We're going to generate some scripts for door knocking and phone banking. And then finally, we're going to talk about logging your voter contacts. But let's go ahead and start back at the top and getting voter data, which will help some people answer some of their questions in the chat. Here I am on my goodparty.org dashboard. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use this sidebar over here, and I'm going to select voter data. This is going to take me to the voter data tab where I can pull voter data. As you can see, I've done this a few times already on my demo account, but what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a custom voter file. For this channel, or for this custom voter file, I'll be selecting a channel. For this example, we'll do door knocking, and we'll come back to that later on. And for the purpose, we're going to do GOTV, which is what we've been talking about in this session. Then you'll hit next, and you're going to select your filters for your voter data that you're looking at. Jared, quick question. I think you said this a few times already, but I just want to double check. Who would you select for GOTV on the voter data list?
Ooh, that's a great question, Patrick. I mean, for me, I'm probably targeting these folks that are in the like likely voter, unreliable voter, first time. This is pretty much what I would choose for a GOTV universe, Patrick. Depending on sort of how large and robust my supporter list is, if I am maybe a little bit short in my ID'd supporters, I might want to dip a little bit lower into those unlikely voter buckets. I mean, those are the folks that are least likely to turn out, but have the most potential to impact the race because they don't typically vote. But that's probably a far more in-depth answer than you were looking for. But this, I think, looks pretty good to me, Patrick.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Derek, for helping out there. So I've got my voter list selected already. I'm going to go ahead and hit create voter file. And what this is going to do is it's going to add a voter file to my list. Generally, this will show up at the very, very bottom of the list where you scroll down and you can access that individual voter file. I'm just going to go ahead and click one right here. Actually, let me see if I can refresh. There we go. I know that's generating right now, but essentially we're going to be generating a door knocking script that'll show the date for when this was generated. For any of these scripts, though, what you can do is you can click on that link. You'll see the list that you created, and then you can download a CSV. You can also view the filters that you had selected previously. When you download a CSV, this is just going to download on your computer. But one thing that I would recommend doing is opening up a spreadsheet. I've got Google Sheets here opened, and this is one that I had imported previously, where you can just import the voter spreadsheet, and you can see all the information for the voters. Since this is a door knocking get out the vote sheet, we can see the names of the voters. We can see the address. Since we'll be door knocking, we can see where we'll be going. And one thing that you might want to also look into, maybe adding like a contacted column here where you can go in and you can mark down whether you've contacted them, yes or no, or other columns that might be helping you throughout your campaign, specific to what you were trying to accomplish. Next, we're going to go ahead and look at some core tools. So we'll start out with our voter outreach tools. I'm going to click on the voter outreach on the sidebar over here. And then we're going to start with scheduling a text message campaign. So by scheduling a text message campaign, I'm going to go through here. I'm going to click on text message. And what's going to pop up is it's going to be a little explainer showing you how this works. There's going to be 5 steps, which is going to be first selecting your target audience, choosing your script, attaching an image, scheduling the campaign, and then one of our PAs will reach out to you with next steps. So I'm going to click next here. And very similar to what we just talked about, let's go ahead and choose for get out the vote. It's going to be likely voters, unreliable voters, first-time voters. I'm going to say independent party. These 3 age groups right here, and I'll leave it there. What we can see is that we're also getting kind of an estimates for the cost of what this scheduled campaign is going to be. It's going to be 138 voters, which will cost only about $4.83. And if you have additional information that you're looking for, you can add context here for our PAs. I'm going to go ahead and click next. Now here, you can add a script. This is the script that's going to be sent in your text message. You can add your own script and write it out. You can use AI to generate a brand new script. So this will actually generate a script based on the context provided, such as get out the vote. Or you could use a saved script. For the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and use a saved script and click next. And here I've got a text message get out the vote script that I'm going to use. So I'm going to go ahead and select that, hit select. And this is pulling up the script that I had generated previously using AI. Here, I'm going to go ahead and hit save. Then it's going to ask me to attach an image. I've got one already here in my downloads. And I'm going to go ahead and hit next here. Last part here is to schedule the text message campaign. So you will need at least 3 days for this to process. So what we'll do is we will click the select date. We need to choose at least 3 days in advance. I'm going to go ahead and say just choose a random date, and this will be the 10th of October. And if you have any scheduling requests, you can add that context here for the PAs as well. And then finally, you would click schedule. Now, I'm not going to click schedule because I don't want to actually schedule a campaign right now. But by clicking schedule, that would actually schedule the campaign. And then our PAs will be able to review that script and that text message campaign and finalize that send out for you. Next is going to be robocalls. So very similar. You would start in the voter outreach section over here, and we're going to select robocalls. It's a very, very similar process. Essentially, you're going to start and select the target audience, choose the script, schedule the robocall, and the PAs will reach out to you with next steps. So I clicked next, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. Go over here and click the group of voters that I'm reaching out to. It shows me the voters selected and the estimated cost for this robocall campaign. Like I mentioned, you have the same 3 options for generating a new script, adding your own, or using a saved script. I've got a script saved here, so I'm going to go ahead and hit use a saved script and hit next. And I've got a robocall get out the vote script that I had written earlier. So I'll go ahead and select that. It's going to show the script right here. I'm going to hit save. And then very similar to text messaging, you've got 3 days to process. You would come in here, you would choose a date, and you would add scheduling request context if there is any at all, and you'd hit schedule. But again, I'm not going to go ahead and schedule this because I do not want to actually schedule a robocall campaign right now in this demo. Next, let's talk about generating scripts. So I mentioned that you could come in here and you could generate scripts for your texting and robocall campaigns. But to generate scripts, what we can do is we can come over here to Content Builder. And there's also, actually, I'm going to go back to voter outreach really quick. 2 other campaign types, which we'll be talking about, which is door knocking and phone banking. Essentially, what we're going to be doing is generating scripts for these 2, door knocking and phone banking. So I'm going to go to Content Builder. And here, what I can do is I can hit Generate in the Content Builder. And I'm going to, let's say that we're looking at door knocking, generate. I'm going to search for door knocking on here, scroll down. And I believe this is actually in speeches and scripts. So we have a door knocking script right here. I'm going to select this. And what that's going to do is it's going to generate a door knocking script for me. It might take a moment for that to generate. I'm going to go ahead and refresh my page. This might take a minute or 2. But while it's loading on there as well, I can go ahead and show you the one that I had generated previously. So earlier today, I generated a door knocking script. You can select that, and then you can see what the script would look like. This is one that was generated by our AI earlier today. You can come in here if you need to. You can make edits to the script as well, make changes, and then you can copy that script and send it over to you. You can regenerate the script. You can translate the script if you need to. Of course, it's always good to get somebody to check that translation as well. And you would use that script when you're door knocking. So I mentioned previously, whenever we do have our door knocking list, which I'm showing you right here, we can go to these addresses, we can copy that script, and then we can use that script while we are going to those doors and knocking and talking to those voters. Finally, I'm going to show you the generating a phone banking script. Also, here's that door knocking script that I had tried to generate earlier as well. It might take a little bit of time to generate, but that is how the script generates right there. I'm going to hit generate again, and we're going to look at phone banking for get out the vote. So here I'm going to scroll down to outreach and community engagement, and I'm going to click this one, phone banking, get out the vote. And that's going to do a very similar process. It's going to generate a script for you. As we've mentioned, it took a minute or 2 to generate this door knocking script. So I can show you right here that we have this phone banking one that I generated earlier today. And this is very similar to the door knocking. It is a script. It will talk you through essentially what you'd be saying on the phone. Also, a lot of these scripts will tell you when you ask voters, have you had a chance to vote? If yes, this is how you can answer. If you ask another question, would you mind if you supported me? If they supported, you can answer it this way. If they didn't support, you can answer it this way. It'll allow you to basically understand of how you should take that conversation throughout the conversation that you're having during phone banking, door knocking, or however it is that you're communicating with voters. Now, finally, let's say that we've gone out, we've used this door knocking voter list for get out the vote. We've contacted many of these voters. And we want to go ahead and log them and capture them to make sure that we're aware of how many voters that we've contacted and if we're getting closer to our win number. What we can do is we can go back to our dashboard, and you're going to see this option on the dashboard, which is going to be showing your campaign progress. So here, I've got a lot of work that I need to do to contact more voters. But I can come here, I can hit record voter contacts. I can go to doors knocked because we were looking at a door knocking campaign. And we can say that I went out and knocked on 40 doors. And so here, I've contacted 40 voters. I can hit save. And this is going to update your campaign progress up to, I think I started at 1,001. Now I'm at 1,041 voters contacted. I've got a long way to go, but I know now how to set up these campaigns so that I can increase those numbers and go from there. I think that's everything that I've got on my end, though. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Rob and Derek.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that, Patrick. So there are a lot of tools that we make available to be able to help with this. I'm going to ask our call producers to go ahead and bring up our survey for how this training has performed for you guys. Has this been a good use of your time? I also want to call attention. I dropped in the chat. We didn't talk a lot about scripting best practices because the AI tools do so much of it for you. But I included a free guide to get out the vote scripting best practices that covers some things. And we actually, one of the first questions that we had, and we'll dig into Q&A here, one of the first questions that we had was about this, which are, how can scripts perform well for get out the vote? Are there any best practices? My overall tips for this, and I have specific channel by channel advice that I put in that guide for you. My overall best practices would be one, make sure you make that shift away from persuasion to logistics. It's not why you should vote for this candidate, it's how are you going to vote, right? And there's the more that you can do to plan with the voter how they're going to vote, the better. There's been a lot of research and a lot of data that backs that simply by making a plan, and the more detailed the plan is with the voter, the more likely they are to vote, even if they vote a totally different way. So who's going to drive you to the polls? Do you need a ride to the polls? Those are the types of questions to be asking. Are you going to vote in person? Are you going to vote by mail? Make a deadline, make it urgent by sharing deadlines to help drive turnout. Let them know early voting ends this day, and if you're going to vote by person, you have to do it. You have to be in line before 8 p.m. As an example. Make it easy. Give an easy short links have been my best friend for a lot of these things. Directing people towards the websites that let them know where their polling place will be. And don't forget to track responses. Somebody tells you that they have already voted, I would say believe them, right? And this is related, I think, to one of the first questions that I want to lift up from the Zoom chat. Mark had asked Derek, does the voter list update after people vote? And how often is the file updated? So I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, how often the file is updated is very dependent on who the election authority is. It's a little bit different depending on what county and what state you're in. But I would say most jurisdictions give our frequency scaling drops for absentee voting. And so what I mean by that is like a month out, you might get a once a week update once ballots hit. 10 days out, you might start getting them every 3 days or twice a week. And then typically in the run up to elections, you're getting almost a daily report of new absentee voters. States can call these different things if you wanted to do a little bit of Googling. Sometimes they're called the absentee voter roster or the early vote roster. But what I would do is I would contact your whoever your election authority is, whether that's your municipality, your county, or the state Secretary of State's office, Board of Elections, whatever it's called in your state. I would ask them how often they are providing those updates. And depending on how often they're giving those data distributions is sort of the answer on how often our data gets updated. I will say that for most of you guys who are going to be doing that more advanced voter file targeting with absentee voters, that'll have to be something you work with your political associate directly with. Another pitch for if you guys aren't pro, why you should go pro. But because we have access to a lot more tools than what you guys have in the self-service portal, and we'll be able to, at the very least, tell you whether or not we're going to be getting a real-time access to that data. But in most states and in most counties, we're getting regular updates from the election authorities with updated absentee voter information.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And there were a whole bunch of questions both during the call and also in the call for questions here about vote by mail in general. And so I wanted to sort of double click on some of the vote by mail best practices. One of the questions here, a really specific question, is if someone tells me that they've already voted by mail, should I just thank them, or is there more that I can ask them to do?
Yeah, I for one thing, you should thank them if they've already voted by mail. Absolutely should. But sort of like what I spoke on earlier, if they have voted, ask them to help you turn out 3 more people. That might be asking them, hey, can you text 5 or 10 of your friends? Ask them to go and vote early. Tell them how easy it was to go vote by mail or vote early. But you're going to be doing, hopefully, recruiting that person to do a little bit of vote planning with some other voters on your behalf. And if they say no to that, there's not a whole lot you can do. That's also okay. You're going to continue to thank them and then send them off on their way. But yeah, if at all possible, if you have somebody who votes and they say that they voted, try to get them to convince somebody else to vote.
Yeah, my lowest level of ask with this, if they're not willing to ask a friend, if they're not like, if you're getting no's, the bare minimum that I expect from someone is you gotta post a I voted sticker on Instagram to create that social pressure for everybody else to vote. So it can be just share a picture of your I voted sticker on the gram. If it's not on the gram, it didn't happen. And any other advice for folks who want to chase the absentee ballots as a part of their strategy?
Yeah, I think if we're talking absentee ballot chase, again, if you guys can get current information on what holds it, I would, as a best practice, try not to let more than 3 days pass from the time that we know they've requested their ballot or received their ballot to having some form of communication with you. The thing about absentee ballots, I know I vote the same day my absentee ballot comes in the mail. Now, granted, I'm probably a little bit more informed than just your average voter. And I work on election day, as you can imagine, so I don't have time to go vote on Tuesday itself. But you want to sort of strike that balance between giving them time to research what's on their ballot, especially if you're like in a far down ticket race, and making sure ideally that they're the last person, the last campaign they talk to before they vote. And so really my biggest piece of advice is to be exceptionally disciplined with your outreach and your data management when it comes to your absentee ballot chase. It's going to be a huge difference. I would also say it is not it would probably behoove you to have a relatively positive relationship with your town clerk. They're going to be doing a lot during the early vote period and the absentee ballot period. And so make sure that in your interactions with the town clerks and the registrars who are managing that system, that you are the most polite and friendly person on the planet. Those people are working hard. It's a fairly thankless job. But be disciplined in your data, be disciplined in your outreach. That's going to make the difference with your absentee ballot chase.
Yeah, I've got a technical question here about just process with the goodparty.org tool set that I think, Derek, you can answer. After someone schedules using some of the tools that Patrick demoed, like setting up a texting campaign, for example, what's the time frame that a political associate, or a PA, as we use for shorthand, what's the time frame that they should be contacting the pro candidate?
It depends on sort of how far in advance that you're scheduling these texts, but it shouldn't be any more than 3 days out from when your text is scheduled. That's when, just on my end, I'm going to get a lot of notifications saying, "Hey, reminder, Scott has got a text message coming up." And I'm going to send an email saying, "Hey, I've got your script. Just want to make sure this is still the script. This is still the audience. If we need to send along an invoice, we'll do that." But typically that's happening like 3 business days in advance of launch. Might be a little bit different if you're scheduling like 4 or 5 in a row. Even outside of that 3 days, like chances are, like me as a PA, I'm going to reach out to you if you are scheduling that far in advance to hopefully get final approval that far in advance. If it falls within that 3-day window, what I will say is, I've got like 100 candidates that I'm working with right now this cycle. And I know there's not a single PA on this team from myself to anybody else who works on the political team. None of us mind an email, a bump email, hey, just a reminder, still want this text to go out. Please text me back. That is not going to offend anybody. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, right, Rob? So if you guys find that your PA isn't responsive, I want you to picture them huddled over their desk crying over text messages, and then I want you to just send them an email and say, hey, just really want to get this straightened out with you, and we'll make sure that somebody follows up with you fairly quickly.
Yeah, and in general, what's the limit for how quick it takes to spin up a texting campaign?
It's I would say 3 business days to go
Yeah.
through like the script approval process. I know it's baked into the scheduler too, where it won't let you schedule within 3 business days. So that's typically what we ask for.
Great. Super helpful. We got a question from Michael about what is the best way to motivate volunteers for the last 4 days when everyone's exhausted, and any advice for recruiting more volunteers for Get Out the Vote weekend.
Yeah. So one super important role on GOTV that's sort of unrelated to voter contact and unrelated to sort of the art of getting folks to go to the polls is I'm going to call them a hype beast. Okay, someone who is high energy, who can lead your volunteers, who can kick off your volunteer events. Someone who'd be willing to, especially when people come back from their volunteer shift, debrief them and celebrate their success. And the other person you should get is what I call a comfort captain. Okay, this is someone to bake cookies and bring food and snacks and things to your volunteers to keep their energy high, to keep them focused, to keep them motivated. One of the things I like to do for GOTV, especially if we have we need to get 250 people out to vote, as I'm literally going to make just a giant wall thermometer like it's a second grade science class, okay? Like a second grade fundraiser. And when folks are done, hey, I talked to 16 people who are going to go out to vote. I literally have them go up on the wall and fill in the thermometer. I mean, really anything you can do to celebrate the success that you're having and to thank your volunteers is going to keep them motivated. I also just think, I mean, the really cool thing about Election Day is that the urgency is sort of baked into the entire thing, right? Here we have, in most cases, a 12-hour window to get I know a certain amount of other people to take an action. And I just think that having that urgency baked in is going to help you recruit volunteers. There is no other shift they can help you, right? Like after Election Day, the campaigns are done until the next cycle. And so having that urgency and leading with that urgency, I think is going to help you bring a lot more people into the fold and get them to actually show up for shifts. The other thing, last thing here, is do a round of confirmation calls before all of your volunteer shifts. Call up your volunteers, make sure they're still showing up. That way, if you realize, hey, only half the people are going to show up for this shift, you might be able to sort of pull some folks that were in the wings and make sure that those doors get knocked, those calls get made, those texts get replied to, or sort of whatever the action is. Do a round of confirm calls. It makes a huge difference.
All right, I see 2 more questions, and this is a final call to slide 1 or 2 more in under the wire for folks. But this question comes from James, and James says, if I can only afford 1 or 2 tactics, what are the best get out the vote tactics for a first-time candidate? Should I be focusing on phone banking, text messaging, digital ads, knocking doors? And I love this question. This is the type of question I feel like I would have asked. And I think that it's also open to some interpretation based on the difference of your campaign. So we'll try to give a good one-size-fits-all answer with this, but some of the questions that I'd reflect back to you, James, are, your district better than anyone. You live there. Do you have a large population of young people? If so, you should lean into texting, for example. But if you have mostly older people, if the average age in your town skews north of 60, then you probably have more landlines than cell phones, and you might want to tap into phone calls a little more heavily. So those are some of the things that you want to measure. I'll answer this first, and then I'll let you chime in, Derek, though. But as a basic rule, this is get out the vote is where I really like text messaging, because I think that it is the most affordable way to reach people at scale. And I think that it's a good reminder. And because most of the best get out the vote scripts are based around logistical reminders, I think that having at least 3 rounds of texting set up tends to be my recommendation to every single candidate. Have it for the start of early voting, have it for when you know that vote by mail envelopes are going to be dropping, and then have it the day of the election itself, if not the night before. So that I always recommend those 3 rounds of texting to people. And if you're a member of our Circle community, you can earn up to 10,000 free texts just by being an active member of that community. So ask our producers to drop the Circle link in the chat. It's a good time to plug that. That Circle community is also where we're going to be posting the recording of this call tomorrow. If there's anything that you want to go back and study or rewatch again. And then I will say that knocking every door is always going to be my number one. But if you take that as a given, I'd say you pair the smart texting with a final push of digital ads. And we have a really great course on how to run and win digital ads in Circle as well. So I'll give a plug for that. Meta ads are cheaper than you think they are. It's usually about a penny per impression, and it can be a really helpful way to put yourself over the line, especially in some of these municipal races where, to Derek's point at the beginning of the call, we're talking about margins of 10, 20 voters separate the win. So that's my take. I would rank it number one as a given. You're definitely knocking as many doors as you can. That, I think, is something that you can usually manage with volunteers and do for free. Number two is you get out with the 3 rounds of texting. And then number three is you work up a modest paid digital advertising budget.
Yeah, I honestly, my thought process is aligned with you on that, Rob. Like, obviously, if you have the time, you're gonna want to cover those free things, the door knocking and the phone calls. That cost you $0. It just costs you the sweat, right? That is, it's just bodies and time. Texting, I think, again, assuming you're working off a list of supporters, we don't have to ask a candidate ID, and where text messages and also robocalls, which I'm going to put in a very similar vein. One of the best, most effective use cases are apolitical PSA style reminders to vote. That might include some vote planning language and probably should. But those reminders directly to supporters saying, hey, just a reminder, tomorrow is election day. The polls are going to be open from 7 to 8. You need to bring an ID in order to vote. Reply yes after you've cast your ballot. Something along those lines, fairly simple. Those get, I'm going to say, the least amount of blowback and the greatest impact are these text messages and robocalls that you're going to send out in the last couple days of the election. And again, if you have the space for it and you're verified for it, any amount of money into paid social is gonna be fairly effective. Like Rob says, it's extremely cheap. It's way cheaper than you think it is. Like you said, about a penny an impression, and that can make a big difference if it's paired really well with an effective texting and door knocking effort. So.
Great. Well, I'm going to close us out on that question. Thank you all for an engaged and solid set of questions throughout the training, and especially there at the end. We, in 2 weeks, will be back with an election day preparation training. So we're going to really drill into what election day looks like and what the that last 24 hours can look like, the way to score some of those late game points, the buzzer beaters, so to speak, and what you can expect on election day. So that'll be on October 16th. And we'll be back with that training. So look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you all for being here. I dropped a link to our Circle community in the Zoom chat, and hello to the folks who are already in Circle watching this. And thank you for a really great set of questions throughout the call here. So thank you all. And well, you know what? There's one last question. This one slipped right in there. And this is from Donald White. Donald is a great member of Circle, and I don't want to miss this one. So this will be the true last question from Donald. Derek, what do you think about direct mail during Get Out the Vote? And I like direct mail. I think that it can be difficult sometimes because it has fixed costs associated with it, and direct mail can be very expensive. That being said, direct mail, there's a ton of research behind how effective it is. It's just harder for candidates who are self-funding to be able to do multiple rounds of direct mail. So I like it as a tactic if you've got the budget for it, but that's not always the case. So it is, again, one of the higher impact tools that you have in your playbook, but it's also one of the higher expense tools. And so I usually try to find that sweet spot between affordability and effective. That way I can get the most bang for my buck. And that's why direct mail doesn't make it into my top 3. But if I've got the budget for it, I always include it in my Get Out the Vote strategy. And I think it's a must for statewide efforts. Derek, anything to add on that before we break?
Nothing to add. You hit the nail on the head. Do direct mail if you have the budget for it. If you don't, I throw the money into text, robos, paid social.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you all. We will see you in 2 weeks. We appreciate you. And thanks for hanging out with us on a Thursday.